They didn't even try to hide it. Not the omission in the will, not the smug glances my sister threw my way during the reading, not the shallow condolences my parents offered, like I was the distant cousin who just happened to show up instead of their firstborn daughter. I sat in that cold office, leather sticking to the backs of my legs, while the family lawyer cleared his throat and read the words I had dreaded hearing my entire life. All real estate holdings, including the primary residence at Windermere Hill, shall be passed on to Alexandra Rose Fairchild, he said, his voice flat, indifferent. Alexandra. My little sister. She wore white like it was a coronation, as if she knew the outcome before she even walked in. I clenched my jaw and folded my hands in my lap, willing them not to shake. The old grandfather clock ticked, echoing each second like a gavel in my ears. I waited for the part that would mention me. Something. A trust. A cottage. A painting. Nothing. Not a word. It wasn't until the end of the reading that my name was finally mentioned. To Genevieve Clarendon Fairchild, a gift of remembrance. The lawyer paused, his eyes flicking up like he regretted what came next. $10,000, and the collection of photo albums stored in the attic. A laugh, sharp and dry, slipped past my lips before I could stop it. It echoed against the mahogany walls of the office like broken glass. $10,000 and a few dusty albums. Alexandra didn't look at me. She adjusted her pearl earrings and crossed her legs, calm as a spring breeze. My parents sat beside her, silent. My father didn't even meet my eyes. My mother pursed her lips, the only sign of emotion she dared show. I stood. That's it? I asked, the words dry and heavy. The lawyer nodded. It's what was specified in the will. They're still alive, I said, pointing at my parents. This isn't some ancient document. They signed this. They agreed to this. My mother stood, smoothing her silk blouse. Genevieve, this isn't the place. No, I said, it is exactly the place. But the lawyer was already stacking papers, and Alexandra had risen, linking arms with my mother like a queen returning from her coronation. My father gave me a look I couldn't read, something between guilt and resignation, and followed them out. The door clicked shut. I was left alone with the smell of old books, a check for $10,000, and a lifetime of bitterness blooming in my chest. It took me a moment to breathe again. A long, slow inhale. My nails dug crescents into my palms. They thought this was over. They thought I'd go quietly. But the truth was, I had never been the quiet one. I had just been careful. And now, I had nothing to lose. 2 days later, I stood in front of Windermere Hill, the mansion that had been in our family for 3 generations. Alexandra had moved in already. A garish white BMW was parked in the circular driveway, its polished surface screaming new money. Movers bustled in and out, carrying crates labeled Fragile and Paris 2019. I stood by the wrought iron gate, dressed in jeans and a plain black top, watching the circus unfold. "Can I help you?" a voice called. I turned. A man with a clipboard, presumably the lead mover, approached. "No," I said, smiling thinly. "I'm just remembering." He hesitated, then nodded and walked away. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had grown taller in spirit. I walked back to my rental car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the columned facade. They had cut me out of the will. But they hadn't taken me out of the game. And it just so happened I knew exactly how to play. Windermere Hill was worth $9.4 million. I knew this because I had appraised it myself. Not recently, of course. But during my short-lived career as a real estate consultant, I had cataloged every square foot of it for a proposal my parents never acknowledged. Back then, I thought if I showed them I cared about the legacy, they'd see me, include me. Instead, they wrote me out. But their oversight would be their undoing. The house had a quirk, one not even Alexandra knew about. The title had a clause. It was buried deep, in old records dating back to my grandfather's ownership. He had taken out a lien for a loan he never repaid before his death. The lien had been transferred several times, lost in a sea of paperwork, as my parents refinanced and renovated over the years. But legally, it was still there. The debt had never been cleared, which meant the property wasn't entirely theirs to give. And guess who owned the holding company that acquired that debt 5 years ago in a portfolio purchase for a now-defunct credit union? Me. Genevieve Clarendon Fairchild. The name they thought they erased. I scheduled the meeting with the county recorder's office first, then with a lawyer, then with a property transfer specialist. Within 2 weeks, I filed the paperwork. The lien gave me leverage, but I didn't just want leverage. I wanted the mansion. So I made an offer. One they couldn't ignore. I waited for the call. It came on a Friday afternoon. I was in my tiny apartment in the city, eating leftover takeout and watching the rain smear the skyline. My lawyer's voice was calm, professional. "The Fairchild estate has accepted your offer," he said. I blinked. "I own the house?" "Technically, yes. The transfer will be finalized Monday. They're vacating this weekend." I swallowed. "And Alexandra?" "Her name was never on the deed." I arrived at Windmere Hill on Sunday evening. The sky was lavender. The trees cast long shadows across the lawn. The white BMW was gone. I stood at the gate, key in hand. No one greeted me. No one needed to. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The scent hit me first. Lemongrass and cedar, my mother's signature blend. But the house was empty. My footsteps echoed against marble floors. The chandeliers above me glittered like they remembered every word spoken in the shadows. I dropped my bag on the grand piano bench and walked slowly from room to room. The library, the dining hall, the solarium. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt familiar. In the sitting room, I found one item left behind. A single framed photo of Alexandra, my parents, and me, from 15 years ago. We were smiling. I took the frame, opened it, and slid the photo out. The glass cracked. I folded the picture and placed it in my coat pocket. Then I sat down in my father's old armchair and looked out at the gardens. They had taken me out of the will, but I had taken back the legacy. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The dawn light seeped through the draped windows in pale slashes, painting the marble floors of Windmere Hill in muted gold. I woke in a room I had only dreamed of owning, the soft pillows unfamiliar beneath my head. My heart pounded, not with fear or regret, but with anticipation. Today, I would begin to make this house mine. I sat up and ran a hand along the satin comforter, smoothing out a crease. The silence was absolute, save for the faint hum of the city beyond these ancient walls. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. The hardwood was cold against my bare feet, grounding me in this moment. Clutching the framed photo I had rescued from the sitting room, I moved to the window and pulled back the heavy drapes. The formal gardens stretched out before me, dew glistening on sculpted hedges and marble fountains. The sun was just cresting the horizon, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and possible. I traced the outline of my sister's laughing face in the photograph, then slid it into my coat pocket. It would stay there until I decided its fate: burn it, destroy it, or tuck it away as the fuel for the fire in my belly. I dressed quickly in jeans, a fitted white shirt, and boots sturdy enough for exploring. I needed to see every corner of this place before planning my next move. Windmere Hill had secrets, too many for one part of a life. My grandfather's lien had been the first layer. There were decades of hidden rooms, concealed compartments, and whispered legends waiting to be uncovered. In the foyer, I paused at the grand staircase. The oak banister wound upward like the spine of a story, each step a new chapter. But today, I would stay grounded. I slipped down the stairs and turned left, into the library. Row after row of leather-bound volumes stared down at me. My fingers itched to run across their spines, to feel the embossed titles. I pulled out a ladder on wheels and positioned it beneath the shelves, climbing until I reached the top. There, behind a row of encyclopedias, I spotted the oak panel I had noticed before. The wood grain didn't match the rest. It was slightly lighter, newer. With my nails, I pushed at the seam. A soft click, and the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow passage no wider than 2 feet, a crawl space. Heart racing, I slipped inside, flashlight in hand. The air was musty, heavy with dust. I moved forward until the passage widened into a small room, no bigger than a closet. But it wasn't empty. In the center stood a pedestal, draped in a heavy burgundy cloth, embroidered with the family crest. I pulled at the fabric to reveal a single item, an ornate music box, tarnished brass flecks inlaid with mother of pearl. I traced the crest, 2 griffins guarding a shield, and lifted the lid. Inside, a small ballerina spun slowly on a tiny platform, delicate and haunting. The notes of Clair de Lune trickled from within, warped by age but still beautiful. I closed my eyes and let the music wash over me. This belonged to my grandmother. She died when I was 6, before I understood the weight of legacy or sorrow. My mother had kept it locked away, dusty and forgotten in the attic. This music box was a testament to the life they never shared with me, a life they preserved for Alexandra as a showpiece, ignoring the bond it represented. I lifted it carefully, tucking it into my bag. There were other rooms, other secrets. But I couldn't explore them all at once. Not today. Instead, I climbed back through the panel, resecured it, and locked the library door behind me. Each room in this house was a testament to Fairchild achievement. The grand ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers. The billiard room, mahogany tables polished to a mirror finish. The solarium, where tropical plants thrived under glass ceilings. But what was a house without its stories? I moved to the dining hall next. Long oak tables set with silver and china spoke of centuries of dinners, weddings, anniversaries, celebrations. Yet something was missing. Place cards for my name. I knelt by the sideboard, rifling through the drawers until I found a stack of embossed stationery. These had been my mother's personal notes, unsent letters she wrote to my father. I skimmed one, dated a month before my birth. I'm not sure I ever wanted a daughter. The words stung, heavy with the regret she never voiced to me. I pocketed the letters and continued on, each memento a layer of memories, betrayals, and possibilities. Midday sun spilt through the conservatory doors, illuminating a long table covered in plans, blueprints, tax documents, appraisals. Alexandra's handwriting scrawled across them in neat loops. Install skylights, renovate West Wing, hire decorator. I flipped the top sheet, revealing my name in the footer, G.C. Fairchild, consulting fee. She had tried to bypass me but still acknowledged my expertise, even if only to give her plans a veneer of legitimacy. I gathered the documents and folders, but not before I circled back to the entrance. I locked the doors and set the alarm codes to ones only I would know. Let Alexandra try to waltz back in. By afternoon, I returned to the sitting room where that cracked photo once rested. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Hey everyone, Genevieve here. It's been a wild morning, finding hidden rooms and family secrets. But that's only the beginning. There's so much more, under these floors, and behind these walls. Stick around, because tomorrow, I'll show you something they never wanted you to see. I ended the recording and let the silence settle again. I was alone. I was home. And this was just the start. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. By the time evening fell, Windmere Hill no longer felt like an empty relic or a battlefield of family betrayals. It felt like mine. Not just a legal possession, but a breathing extension of my will. I lit the fireplace in the east drawing room and let the flames dance their shadows across the paintings on the walls. Portraits of long-dead Fairchilds peered down at me with eyes that hadn't witnessed my exile, but now bore witness to my return. I stood before my great-grandfather's painting, a severe man in a navy coat with gold buttons, arms crossed, brow furrowed, as if he doubted anyone would ever be worthy of this legacy. I met his gaze. "I'm the one who came back," I whispered. Outside, the wind was picking up, the trees swayed, and something about the motion felt like a bow. Like nature itself recognized a new chapter beginning. I couldn't sleep that night. I paced the halls barefoot, the cold floors a reminder of the house's size and solitude. But I wasn't afraid. I had walked alone for most of my life. Only now I was walking inside walls they swore I'd never see again. By morning, I had made a decision. If they were going to pretend I didn't belong to this family, then I would carve a place so undeniable that it echoed beyond their reach. I wouldn't sell Windmere Hill. I wouldn't destroy it in some dramatic rage. No, I would elevate it. I would turn it into something more powerful than inheritance, influence. I called Sasha Novak first. Sasha and I hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since our venture collapsed and she moved to Madrid. But when she picked up, her voice was exactly as I remembered, sharp, fast, alive. "Genevieve," she said, breathless. "Please tell me you're not calling about another crypto app." "I own a mansion," I said. A pause. "Say that again." I did. 30 minutes later, we were on a video call. I walked her through the halls, the staircases, the west wing that needed repairs. I showed her the library, the ballroom, the untouched garden maze. "This place is magic," she whispered. "It could be anything. A retreat, a gallery, a private club." "Wait, why am I giving you ideas? What do you want to do with it?" Quote, I didn't answer immediately. Because I didn't want it to be about what it could be. I wanted it to be about what I needed it to be. "I want it to be a statement," I finally said. "Something my parents can't deny. Something the world will talk about, even if they refuse to mention my name." Sasha stared through the screen. Then she smiled. "You always did have a flair for dramatic legacy plays. What's the budget?" "All of it," I said. Within the week, Windmere Hill became a construction zone. I hired only the best: designers, restoration experts, architects who had worked on castles and royal manors. I gave them one directive: keep the bones, elevate the soul. The library was converted into a knowledge salon, where art, politics, and entrepreneurship would intersect. I installed a state-of-the-art recording room behind a false bookcase. In the West Wing, we uncovered original stone arches hidden behind drywall. My grandfather had covered them during one of his more modern renovations. I had them cleaned, lit, and restored to prominence. Every Friday night, I hosted salons, private, invite-only gatherings. At first, it was just Sasha, a few of her Madrid contacts, and some investors I'd met during my consulting years. But word spread. Soon, senators were walking my marble halls. Authors, venture capitalists, gallery owners. My name wasn't in the papers yet, but Windmere Hill was. "The comeback of a forgotten estate," one article read. Another called it, "The Rise of the Invisible Heiress." Invisible, that word made me laugh. Because soon, no one would be able to ignore me. Alexandra showed up on a Sunday. I was in the greenhouse, clipping dead leaves from a fern, when Bernard, my new security head, radioed in. "There's a woman at the gate, blonde, says she's your sister." I froze. It had been months. I hadn't heard a word from my parents or Alexandra since I reclaimed the house. No emails, no legal challenges, no veiled threats. Just silence. It was more haunting than rage would have been. "Let her in," I said. I met her at the grand entrance. She stood on the top step in a beige trench coat and sunglasses that probably cost more than my car. Her face was unreadable. "You changed the door color," she said. I had. From white to deep navy, regal, intentional. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked through the foyer like a ghost revisiting a past life. Her eyes darted over the chandelier, the new Persian rugs, the abstract paintings replacing our old oil portraits. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do all this?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I led her to the solarium, where the light fell soft and amber across the antique couch. I sat. She didn't. "You took it from me," she said. "I was supposed to have this. Dad promised." I tilted my head. "Did he?" She looked away. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down a copy of our family's memoir, the one our great-uncle had self-published. I handed it to her. "Page 198, I said. She frowned, flipped it open, and read. Her lips parted slightly. "What is this?" A reference to the original deed clause, I said. The lien Grandpa never resolved. I bought the debt, Alex. I didn't steal the house. I claimed what was left open. She slammed the book shut. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. No, I said quietly. I just never assumed anyone else would save me. We stared at each other. Then, unexpectedly, her shoulders dropped. Her jaw relaxed. They want to talk to you, she said. My pulse quickened. Who? Mom, Dad, they want to come here. I leaned back. The game was shifting. They arrived the following Thursday. A black town car pulled up the gravel drive like a funeral procession. My mother stepped out first, her heels clicking with precision. My father followed, slower, leaning on a cane I didn't remember him needing. I met them outside. No hugs, no greetings. Just tension. It looks different, my mother said. I nodded. It is. We walked together into the drawing room. I offered tea. My mother declined. My father said, Why did you do it? He asked. Why not just let it go? I pulled out the photo from my pocket, the same one I had found weeks ago. Because you already let me go, I said, years before you signed that will. My mother flinched. I handed her the photo. I kept it to remind myself what I lost, I said. But I'm not holding on to it out of bitterness. I'm holding it because I refuse to let that little girl disappear, the one who thought she mattered. My father looked down at the floor. You did matter, he whispered. Then why didn't you fight for me? Silence. They left an hour later, no apologies, but also no demands, just silence and sorrow in their wake. That night, I walked out into the garden maze. The moonlight bathed everything in silver. I followed the old path to the center, where a bench sat beneath a crumbling gazebo. And there, I found it. A letter. Folded and tucked into a glass jar. Addressed to me. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandmother. I opened it with shaking fingers. Dearest Genevieve, if you're reading this, then somehow you found your way back. I always knew you would. This place was never meant to be a prize for those who followed rules. It was meant for the one who remembered what mattered: truth, courage, and love. Make it yours. Love always. Gran. I read it again, and again, until tears blurred the words. Then I looked up at the stars and let myself believe. Not just that I had reclaimed my family's estate, but that maybe, finally, I had reclaimed myself. I spent the morning after my parents' visit sitting in the very heart of the garden maze, holding my grandmother's letter like it was a compass that would finally point me home. I must have read her words 24 times before the paper started to fray at the fold. Each time, the phrase asterisk, not meant to be a prize for those who followed rules, asterisk echoed louder in my mind. I wasn't just reclaiming Windmere Hill. I was rewriting what it meant to carry the Fairchild name. Inside, the house was quiet. Bernard had taken the morning to conduct security upgrades, Sasha was in town but off-site scouting interior partners, and the restoration crew wouldn't return until Monday. I had the estate to myself, a rare kind of stillness. I wandered the hallways, opening doors I hadn't dared to before, rooms my parents had kept locked when we were children, always with a vague explanation like storage or unsafe wiring. The last door at the end of the second-floor corridor, painted dark green and bearing no knob, just a keyhole, was one of them. For years, I thought it was just a maintenance closet, but now I knew better. I retrieved a ring of old keys I had found in my father's study and tried them, one by one. On the 8th try, I heard a soft click. The door creaked open. A rush of stale air spilled out, laced with cedar and something else. Varnish, maybe. The room was large, much larger than I expected, and dimly lit by a single window high in the corner. My breath caught. Paintings. Dozens of them. Portraits, landscapes, abstracts. Every wall was covered, and even the floor was lined with stacked canvases, each meticulously preserved. Some were clearly done by professionals. Others had the rough lines of youth. Unfinished. Almost chaotic. And then I saw it. In the center of the room, propped on an easel like a crown jewel, was a painting of me. 10 years old, sitting in the garden maze with a red scarf tied in my hair and a paperback novel open in my lap. I stepped closer. The signature was unmistakable. Clarice Fairchild, my mother. I couldn't move for several minutes. All this time, I thought she never saw me, never loved me. But this painting, this haunting, tender tribute, told a different story. I sat on the hardwood floor and stared at it until the afternoon light faded from the walls. That night, Sasha returned to Windermere with her usual hurricane energy. She walked into the dining room with 2 lattes, her bag slung over her shoulder, and 100 new ideas. "We need a launch event," she said, dropping a folder on the table. "Something big, something that forces people to see this place, and you, as essential." I blinked out of my fog and opened the folder. It was filled with sketches, guest lists, themes. "The Legacy Gala," she said, spinning slowly. "One night, formal. Invite the press, the politicians, the sharks, and we anchor it in your story. But not in the usual way, not like a revenge tour, like a reveal, an arrival." "Won't that make them, my parents, think I'm just showing off?" Sasha rolled her eyes. "Let them think whatever they want. They already wrote you off. What they believe is irrelevant. This isn't about them. It's about the people watching." She was right. I set the date for 6 weeks out. The transformation was aggressive. Every floor was polished, every chandelier restrung with crystals. The front lawn was re-landscaped, and the garden maze was trimmed into symmetrical perfection. We even installed a small amphitheater, where the greenhouse used to be. And I called in every favor I was owed. I invited startup CEOs who owed me consulting hours, artists I had mentored before I was cut from the family fund, a senator's aide I had once helped dodge a PR scandal. No one said no. Even the whispers started to shift. People began to ask, not asterisk, "Who is she?" Asterisk, but asterisk, "How did she do this?" The week before the gala, I received a handwritten note on thick stationery. "From my father. We are watching. We are proud, if confused." No apology, but also no denial. I tucked the letter away. The night of the Legacy Gala arrived cloaked in rain, just enough drizzle to make the mansion glow with sheen and drama. Floodlights cast warm gold across the newly painted navy door, and the gravel drive buzzed with luxury sedans. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with soft jazz and candlelight. Waiters moved in a silent rhythm. Artworks from the secret studio were on display, curated to form a visual story. The centerpiece, the portrait of me in the garden maze. Sasha raised her glass to me from across the room. I walked out to the balcony where I could see the crowd gathering under umbrellas, smiling and posing for photos. That was when Bernard approached me. "There's someone asking to see you, says she wasn't invited but needs 2 minutes." "Who?" "Alexandra." I hesitated. I could say no, but I didn't. I followed Bernard to the side corridor. Alexandra stood near the greenhouse entrance, hair slick with rain, makeup running in dark streaks. She held a manila envelope. "I wasn't going to come," she said, "but this isn't right. You need to see this." She handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of bank statements, dated over 2 years ago. Massive withdrawals, disguised as renovations and travel. Money from our parents' trust. I looked up. "You did this?" She shook her head. "No, but I saw it happen, and I stayed quiet because I thought I'd inherit Windermere. But you were right. They pick the obedient one until they don't." "Why tell me now?" "Because I lost everything. I thought you'd get revenge, but you built something instead. And maybe that deserves to be protected." I stared at the papers. The trust had been drained. But more than that, my parents had sabotaged their own legacy trying to preserve it. It was almost poetic. I returned to the ballroom with the envelope tucked under my shawl. I stepped onto the stage. The music died down, glasses lowered. I took the microphone. "Some of you know parts of my story, some of you don't. But what matters tonight is not the pain that got me here. It's the truth I built with it." I gestured to the painting behind me. Windmere Hill was never about money, it was about memory. And tonight, I reclaim that memory, not with vengeance, but with vision. Applause. Not polite, real. And in the back of the room, I saw them. My parents. Standing in the shadows. Watching me. And this time, they didn't look confused. They looked afraid. The applause still echoed off the ballroom walls when I stepped down from the stage. The weight of the moment, my words, their silence, the shattering of decades-old illusions, hung over the room like a velvet curtain just pulled back. People began to approach me, some with congratulations, others with cautious curiosity. But I couldn't hear any of it. All I could see, beyond the clinking champagne glasses and soft laughter, were my parents, standing together in the shadow of the western archway, still, watching. My mother clutched her clutch bag with white-knuckled hands. My father's jaw was tight, unreadable. For a moment, the crowd between us was a living tide, guests in gowns and tuxedos milling like fish in a glittering sea. But I pushed through it, every step deliberate. When I reached them, I didn't speak. I simply held their gaze. It was my mother who blinked first. "You invited the press," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Of course I did," I replied. "To parade us?" "No," I said calmly. "To correct the narrative." My father cleared his throat. "What narrative?" I handed him the envelope Alexandra had given me. He opened it. "Read the first page, then the second." His face drained of color. "What is this?" he murmured. "Your miscalculations," I answered. "The trust. The withdrawals. The shell companies. All of it." My mother reached for the papers, eyes scanning them like a woman seeing her own obituary. "You shouldn't have this," she whispered. "But I do," I said, "and you should know something else too. I have already submitted copies to my legal team. And if I find out one more cent was taken illegally, from the Fairchild Foundation, from any future interest-bearing account, from any of the subsidiaries Grandpa established in the 40s, I will take everything." My mother's voice cracked. "You already did." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until only they could hear. "No, what I took was mine. What you tried to keep from me, I earned back. And I won't let you ruin this family from the inside out because of your greed." They said nothing. Eventually, they turned and walked away. Out into the drizzle. Out of my house. Out of whatever version of our lives they had hoped to maintain. Later that night, the ballroom was empty. Only the staff remained, packing away crystal and sweeping up confetti. Sasha and I sat on the front steps, barefoot, glasses of white wine resting on the stone. "You broke them," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "They broke themselves. I just stopped pretending it didn't happen." She nodded. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, "What now?" It was the question I'd been circling for months. Every party, every blueprint, every strategy, all of it had led here. I looked up at the mansion, lit like a cathedral, and thought about what my grandmother had written. "Make it yours. Thy Candace." The following Monday, I began phase 2. No more galas. No more social optics. It was time for purpose. I established the Windmere Initiative, a non-profit hub built within the mansion's West Wing. A cooperative think tank designed to mentor young women from underprivileged backgrounds in law, real estate, finance, and public policy. I funded it with my own capital. No family money, no legacy strings. Sasha brought in a network of educators and mentors. I redesigned the space to hold classrooms, seminar rooms, and a legal library. The ballroom became a lecture hall. The greenhouse turned into a study garden. We converted servant quarters into dormitories for visiting fellows. Applications poured in. By month's end, we had 80 students. By season's end, we had a wait list of 300. I was finally putting Windmere to work. Not as a throne, but as a ladder. The media caught on. An op-ed ran in asterisk, the Times asterisk. The forgotten Fairchild returns with a mansion and a mission. They called me a philanthropist, a reformer, a disruptor of generational wealth. For the first time, I felt none of those terms fit. I was just building the thing I never had, a place that made people feel seen. I received hundreds of letters. Most were from young women, thanking me. One, however, was different. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. The handwriting was trembling but familiar. Genevieve, I can't change what I did. I can't ask you to forgive me. But I can say this. When I painted that portrait of you, it was because I saw you. I just didn't know how to love you properly. I hope one day you believe that was my failing, not yours. Mom. I sat on the edge of my bed, rereading the letter until the sun came up. I didn't know what to do with it, so I put it in the same drawer as Gran's letter. 6 months passed. Windmere Hill was thriving. The town around it shifted too. Local businesses benefited. Young professionals moved in. The house that had once been a symbol of exclusion became the beating heart of the county. But change always invites resistance. One evening, just before dusk, Bernard came to me. There's been a fire, he said. I ran. The east garage, once unused, was in flames. Emergency services had been called, and the blaze was mostly controlled. No one was hurt. But when the fire marshal examined the cause, he said a single word that made my blood run cold. Intentional. Arson. I stood in the ashes the next morning, boots sinking into blackened rubble. Part of the outer wing was scorched, but nothing critical. It was a warning. I received a letter the next day. Typed, no signature. You don't belong in that house. Walk away before it burns you. Sasha was furious. Bernard wanted cameras doubled. The students were shaken. But I felt something different. Clarity. Fear only works when you don't expect the blow. I had expected it from the start. And now it had come. I stood in the drawing room the night after the fire, gazing out at the dark lawn, and I made a decision. I would not hide. I would expand. The Windmere Initiative would no longer be a single location. I would replicate it. Boston, Edinburgh, Marseille. 3 cities, 3 estates, 3 new sanctuaries of possibility. I sold off every non-essentials asset I owned. Sasha connected me to angel investors. The name Fairchild opened doors now, ironically because of what I had done, not what I had inherited. We launched a capital campaign. Within 60 days, we raised $42 million. It was late spring when I received the second letter from my father. He wrote in block print, "Your grandmother would be proud. She always believed in you. I see that now." There was no return address again. But this time, I didn't need it. I folded the note and placed it in the drawer with the others. And when I opened the portrait room again, I added a new painting. Me, standing on the steps of Windmere, surrounded by students, arms open. It wasn't vanity. It was proof that I had come home and made something better. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. Windmere Hill was not supposed to survive this long. Not according to every whisper in town. Not according to the headlines that once called me a phase, a pariah, a woman chasing legacy with a vendetta. But it had survived. And so had I. And now, nearly a year after reclaiming the estate, Windmere had done more than just stay standing. It had become a symbol. And symbols invite consequences. By summer, the initiative had 3 working campuses. Boston's housed a law and media center, Marseille's focused on diplomacy and language immersion, and Edinburgh, tucked in a reformed castle-like estate, taught negotiation and international economics. Windmere remained the headquarters, but its roots had sprouted far beyond its manicured hedges. We were changing lives, tangibly, repeatedly, and it terrified the old guard. The first sign came in the form of a lawsuit, filed quietly in state court. The claim? Unlawful possession and manipulation of ancestral holdings under false pretenses. The name on the filing? Clarence Fairchild. My cousin. A man I hadn't seen since my 10th birthday. A man who once stole my science project and submitted it under his name to win a regional fair. Apparently, he now fancied himself the rightful heir to Windmere Hill, based on a verbal agreement he alleged was made with my grandfather in 1996. A verbal agreement about a house that my grandfather hadn't even wholly owned by then. It was laughable, until I realized who his lawyer was, Evelyn Harwood, my mother's former estate attorney. I closed the file slowly and set it on the marble counter in the kitchen. Sasha was at the coffee machine. When she turned and saw my face, her expression shifted. "What is it now?" she asked. I handed her the court documents. She read them in silence. "Then, you know this is your mother, right?" "Not technically, but strategically," she said, flipping a page. "This is how she fights. Indirectly. Surgically. She'll use Clarence as a pawn, drain your time and your resources, and hope the public gets tired of cheering for you." I took the document back. "Then we don't play her game. So what do you want to do?" "We go transparent." I released a public statement through the initiative. Short, direct, transparent. A legal claim has been filed challenging my right to the property known as Windmere Hill. While I am confident in the strength of the documentation and the legitimacy of the transaction, I believe in modeling what we teach. Integrity under scrutiny. Our mission continues unshaken. It spread like wildfire. Within a week, over 30 media outlets picked up the story. A panel segment aired on national news. Half the anchors called the claim ridiculous. The other half debated inheritance law like it was primetime drama. The students rallied behind me. One posted a TikTok from inside the initiative library titled, "She built this. They're just jealous." It hit 1 million views in 2 days. But the stress was real. I wasn't sleeping, I was being deposed, cross-examined, digging through boxes of decades-old paperwork and emails, trying to track every thread of ownership. And then the other shoe dropped. The second lawsuit came. Not from Clarence. From Alexandra. She claimed I had coerced her into signing away her right to challenge the lien when I reacquired Windmere. That I had emotionally manipulated her, used our family trauma to weaken her defenses. Sasha stormed into the drawing room the day we received it, her phone clutched in one hand and a bundle of emails printed in the other. "This is insane," she said. "She gave you those papers voluntarily. I was in the house. I was standing outside the damn solarium when she showed up soaked and sobbing. She wanted you to have it. You even hugged." I nodded slowly, taking the documents. "She recorded it," I murmured. Sasha blinked. "What?" I went to the wall panel in my father's old study. Behind it, in the small safe, I retrieved a flash drive. I plugged it into the laptop. And there she was. Alexandra. On camera, crying, saying, "They took from me too. You deserve this more than I ever did. I want you to have it." Timestamped. Video. Audio. All of it. Admissible. I leaned back. "Let her try," I said. The suits dragged on. But slowly they fell apart. Clarence's claim was dismissed when his timeline was proven fabricated using archived court logs. Alexandra dropped hers quietly. No apology, just silence. I knew the fallout would come. Family reunions, if there were ever to be any again, would be armed camps. But what I didn't expect was what came next. An invitation. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, the seal waxed in red with an intricate monogram. From the Royal Commonwealth Cultural Trust. I was being nominated for the Global Legacy Award. Not for charity, not for scandal, but for rebuilding a historical site with generational meaning into a force for future equity. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter in hand, unable to process it. I wasn't supposed to be this. Not the daughter they wrote off. Not the sister they cast aside. Not the woman they called vindictive. But there I was, nominated. And a gala to attend in London in just 2 months. Sasha practically shrieked when I told her. She ordered 3 designer gowns before I finished the sentence. But me? I walked back into the painting room. I stood before the portrait of me, the 10-year-old with a book in her lap, painted in soft strokes by a mother who could never say the things she needed to. I whispered, "We did it." And then I started planning. The trip to London was a blur. The award ceremony was held in a historical theater, lined with gold and velvet, the kind of room that demanded quiet reverence. I sat between two founders of multinational nonprofits and a woman who had just turned her childhood trauma into a global education platform. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage in a navy gown. The applause was real, no charity claps, no whispers, just sound and warmth. I accepted the award, made a short speech, thanked the women who came before me, thanked the ones I was fighting for now. I left the stage changed. When I returned to Windermere, the sun was rising. I stood on the front steps with my heels in one hand, the award in the other. The house greeted me like an old friend. It no longer loomed. It welcomed. I walked inside, past the hall where my father once stared past me, past the gallery where Alexandra once stood in disbelief, into the study. And there, on the desk, was a letter. No envelope. No stamp. Just a folded page. My name in bold, sharp strokes. I opened it. "Genevieve, this house was always meant for you. I just didn't know how to let go of it myself. You changed it. You changed us. I won't ask you to forget what we did, but I am asking you to let it become something else, something better. Times, Dad. No return address. Just the letter." I placed it in the drawer. With Gran's. With Mom's. With the one from Alexandra, unsigned, that had arrived a week earlier with one word. Sorry. The drawer was full now. Not of apologies, but of proof. That you can build something from the ashes. That you can take back what was denied. And that sometimes a mansion isn't just a house. It's a declaration. It was one thing to rebuild a house. It was another thing entirely to rebuild its meaning. After London, the entire perception of Windermere Hill shifted. It was no longer the inheritance battleground. No longer the shell of a family's fractured legacy. It was now a name people said with respect, admiration, even envy. The Global Legacy Award became a catalyst. It drew attention, donors, and opportunities. But it also brought scrutiny. I knew this would come. You can't grow in public without someone trying to rip up your roots. It started subtly. A blogger published a piece. From outcast to heiress, is Windermere just a vanity project? It was full of passive jabs disguised as curiosity. They questioned my motivations, speculated on my funding, hinted at unresolved family wounds as fuel. Then came the podcast. An entire episode titled, "The Fairchild Fix: How Money, Trauma, and Old Houses Recycle Power." I listened, twice. They called the initiative elitist. They said it was inaccessible, that I was replicating the very structures I claimed to reform. At first I was furious. Then I was quiet. And then I was determined. Sasha and I sat in the conservatory 2 mornings after the podcast went viral. She had her laptop open, scanning social media. "Some of this is brutal," she muttered, "but honestly, we knew a backlash was coming. You don't build this much influence without becoming a target. What matters now is how we respond." I sipped my tea. "We tell the truth," I said. "Through another press release?" "No," I said, looking around the room. "Through them. The girls, the students, the ones who built this with us." Hones. We created a mini documentary, just 17 minutes. Raw footage, interviews, snapshots of real lives changed by the Windermere Initiative. No scripting, no polish, just reality. Sasha edited it overnight, we uploaded it the next morning. It was titled, "What We Built Here." The response was immediate. Within 24 hours, it was shared over 300,000 times. Comment after comment flooded in. Asterisk, "I got a scholarship to law school because of this." Asterisk, "She changed my life." Windermere gave me the courage to leave my abusive home. The tide turned, not because we argued, but because we reminded people of the truth. Autumn came quickly. The trees lining the drive to Windermere Hill exploded into orange and crimson. The fountain was turned off, the solarium's glass steamed in the mornings, and the first group of fellows rotated out, making room for the winter cohort. I stood on the front steps in a coat and scarf, watching the last of them pile into the shuttle vans. A girl named Marisol broke from the group and ran back toward me. She hugged me, fiercely. "Thank you," she said. I smiled. "What's next for you?" "Law school," she said. I didn't think I could get in. But my mentor here told me something I'll never forget. "What?" She said, "Just because no one handed you a key doesn't mean you can't build a door." I swallowed. "That mentor was me," I whispered. She beamed. "Exactly." The next few months were quiet. The lawsuits had faded. My family retreated into silence again. There were no more anonymous letters, no more fire. But peace has its own kind of pressure. For the first time in years, I felt unsure of the next step. Windermere had evolved. But had I? Was I just building more and more to outrun the wounds they left in me? Or was I finally free of them? I went back to the painting room. For months, I had left it untouched. The canvases, the brushes, the memories. I took out a fresh canvas, mixed my own paints, and I started to paint. Not of me, not of the past, but of the future. A woman standing in front of an open gate, hands outstretched behind her, holding it open for others. The sky around her was stormy, but she wasn't afraid. In November, I received an email from a university in upstate New York. They asked me to speak at commencement. Me, the daughter they wrote out of the will, the woman who once sat in a courtroom being accused of theft by her own family. Now, they wanted my voice to send their graduates out into the world. I said yes. And I told them I wanted no script. The day of the speech, I wore a suit the color of midnight. No notes. No teleprompter. Just me. And 4,000 graduating students staring up at the podium. I took a breath and began. I was told once that I didn't deserve the legacy of my family, that I wasn't fit to carry our name, that I wasn't worthy of what they built. But legacy is not something you inherit. It's something you choose to build. It's not handed down. It's carved out, earned, forged in silence, in setbacks, in quiet moments of doubt when you still show up anyway. I was cut from my own family tree. So I grew a forest. And I opened the gates. Some of you will leave here today, thinking you don't belong in the rooms you'll enter. That your voice is too soft, your past too complicated, your seat at the table too precarious. I'm here to tell you, you belong. Not because of who let you in, but because of who you let in after you. That's the legacy. Don't chase inheritance. Chase impact. And whatever you do, don't ever let anyone convince you that your story doesn't matter. Because it does. And it always will. The crowd rose to their feet, thunderous. But I didn't stay to bask in it. I walked off the stage and into the side corridor. There, waiting for me, was Alexandra. She wore a wool coat and carried no purse, just a worn-out journal in her hands. She looked different. Softer, tired, real. "Hi," she said. I nodded. She handed me the journal. I wrote it after I dropped the lawsuit. It's not an apology. It's just everything I never said. I held it gently. "Can I read it?" "If you want to," she said. "If not, that's okay too." We stood in silence. "You could come back to Windermere," I said slowly. "Not to live, but to see, to understand." She blinked. "You'd let me?" "It was never about letting," I said. "It's about choosing." She nodded. And I knew then that maybe healing wasn't a door you slammed open. Maybe it was a path. One both of us had started walking. Back at Windermere, I placed her journal in the drawer, beside the others. The drawer was almost too full now. Almost. But not quite. It was the first snow of the year when Alexandra returned to Windmere Hill. I watched from the front steps as she stepped out of the car, her boots crunching against the gravel, the sky behind her weeping delicate flakes that shimmered in the twilight. She looked up at the house like it was a stranger, part fear, part awe. Her hands were stuffed into the pockets of a coat too thin for the cold. She hadn't called ahead. She hadn't needed to. I'd left the gate open. We sat in the solarium, no words for the first few minutes. The snow settled on the glass roof above us like ash. Alexandra took a breath. "You changed everything," she said. "Not everything," I replied. "Just what needed changing." She looked around. The solarium had become one of the most used spaces in Windmere, a gathering place for mentorship circles, small classes, or silent reflection. Light filtered in from all sides, and the scent of rosemary and citrus lingered. "I thought I hated you," she admitted quietly, "for taking it, for turning it into something I couldn't control." "Did you hate me then?" I asked. "Or did you hate what I made you look at?" She didn't answer. But she stayed. Alexandra stayed for 5 days. Not in the main wing. She asked to sleep in the old carriage house, and I agreed. She came to 2 student lectures, shadowed a panel I hosted with visiting alumni, and walked the halls she once imagined decorating. On the 3rd day, she found the painting room. I came in and found her staring at the portrait of our mother. It wasn't one I had painted. It was an older one, from years ago, oil on canvas, soft lighting, her hair up in a classic French twist, pearls at her neck. She was cold, Alexandra said, but she was also terrified. Of everything, of losing control, of being forgotten, of being wrong. And of me, I said. Alexandra turned. Maybe. Or of what you reminded her of. Gran's fire, the ambition she never let herself have. I walked to the wall and adjusted the painting, straightening it. "I don't hang it to forgive her," I said. "I hang it so I remember not to become her." That night, after Alexandra left for the carriage house, I stayed in the gallery and painted. I added to the piece I had started months ago, the woman holding the gate open. This time I added another figure. A sister. Not arriving, not begging to enter, but standing just outside, her own hand extended, meeting mine in the middle. Winter settled deep. Windmere Hill transformed in the snow. The gardens lay beneath a blanket of white, statues frosted over like ghosts. The main hearths roared day and night, and students moved in and out of the mansion like fireflies, their laughter echoing down the corridors. I walked the halls more slowly now, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel each moment, each step. This was the first time in my life that I wasn't fighting. Not for approval, not for survival, not for legacy, just being. Then came the letter, folded in heavy parchment. The handwriting neat, familiar. My father. "Genevieve, your mother passed away. Quietly, in her sleep. She had been ill for some time, though she refused to let anyone say it out loud. You know how she was. The service will be private. If you wish to come, it will be held at St. Leonard's Chapel on Thursday. No expectation. Just, I thought you should know. Ty's dad." I sat in the library, letter in hand, the fire crackling beside me. She was gone. And I felt nothing. Not at first. No anger, no sorrow, just a vast, cold quiet. I did attend the service. Not for her. But for me. I wore navy. The same shade as Windmere's new front doors. Sasha came with me. So did Alexandra. The chapel was almost empty. A handful of old friends, distant relatives, no media, no performance. My father sat in the front pew, alone, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I didn't speak to him. Not there. I sat in the back, the place where people go when they aren't sure if they're welcome. And for 35 minutes I watched the wind move through stained glass, letting slices of light fall on the stone floor. I didn't cry, but I remembered. The weight of her voice, the sting of her silence, and the shape of the void she left in me that I had spent years filling with work, willpower, and Windmere. After the service, my father approached me in the snow-dusted courtyard. "You looked like her, you know," he said, "when you were little." I said nothing. "I never knew what to say to you," he went on. "She always spoke for both of us." I met his eyes. "Then maybe that was the mistake," I said. He winced. "I don't ask you to forgive her," he said. "Good," I replied, "because I won't." He nodded. "But you came. That means something." "It means I buried something," I said. And then I turned and walked away. Back at Windmere, the mood was gentle. The students were on holiday break. The house was quieter than it had been all year. I took long walks through the garden maze, now frozen at the edges, and I reread all the letters in the drawer. Gran's, Dad's, Alexandra's, even Mom's, though it still felt like holding barbed wire. Then I added one more. My own. A letter to myself. "Dear Genevieve, you survived. You did more than that. You rebuilt. You healed without closure. You gave without repayment. You opened a door and built a world. This house is not the story. You are. And you are not done yet. Love. Me." I sealed it. Slipped it into the drawer. The last one. Windmere Hill wasn't a monument. It was a movement. And spring was coming. Spring arrived not with a shout, but a sigh. It crept over Windmere Hill gradually, melting the frost from the stone lions at the front gate, coaxing the crocuses from the soil beneath the east lawn, and wrapping the air with that familiar damp warmth that made the corridors smell like cedar and damp parchment. The silence of winter had left something behind in me, too. Not an emptiness, but a hush. Like the hush that settles just before a revelation. The first week of March, I walked the garden maze again. It had been months since I walked its full path. But I needed the motion, the solitude, the symbolism. I passed the center where Gran's letter had once waited. Where I had cried, and decided, and changed everything. Now, I stood in the middle again, feeling something shift. Like I had come full circle. But not to stop. To begin again. The house was busy again by mid-March. The spring cohort had arrived. 64 young women. From 23 cities. With 74 ideas between them. Sasha and I had revamped the onboarding process. We now offered a legacy lab, a 3-week intensive for students to dig deep into their own family narratives, traumas, and myths. We wanted them to see how the stories they inherited shaped the stories they told, and what stories they could rewrite. On the first day, I gave a talk. Standing in the ballroom, sunlight pouring through the tall windows. "I once lived in this house as a ghost," I said, unacknowledged, silent. Present, but not seen. They listened, wide-eyed. "And now," I said, "we use it as a mirror, to see clearly, to reflect what matters, what can grow, what can bloom." They applauded. Not because they were told to, because they understood. It was a good season. For a while. Until the knock on the door. It was a Friday afternoon. I was in the library halfway through reading a fellowship proposal when Bernard came in. He rarely knocked. Today, he did. "There's a man at the gate," he said. "Says his name is Walter Kingsley. Said you might remember him from 20 years ago." My blood chilled. Walter Kingsley was the executor of my grandfather's business trust. He was also the man who once told my 10-year-old self that children weren't allowed in the estate office. "Let him in," I said. He looked exactly the same. Gray suit, square glasses, a face that always seemed skeptical, even when neutral. He didn't sit when I offered him a seat in the library, just stood with his briefcase. "Ms. Fairchild," he said, "I apologize for the surprise visit." But something came up during a review of dormant accounts from the Fairchild-Argonne merger. I hadn't heard that name in years. Argonne and Fairchild had been my grandfather's holding company. It went defunct in the early 2000s after a series of poor investments. Or so we thought. Kingsley opened his briefcase. It appears your grandfather took out a security policy against a leveraged account tied to the estate. One that matured last quarter. The trustees were required to contact the next of kin listed on the policy. He handed me the document. And I stared. Next of kin, Genevieve Clarendon Fairchild. Not Alexandra. Not my father. Me. I read further. The policy had matured into a dividend disbursement. $8.3 million. I looked up. He left this? I asked. It was contingent, Kingsley said, on you residing at Windermere Hill for more than 18 consecutive months. Which, it appears, you have. I blinked. $8 million. Not for the house. For the future. Gran hadn't just believed in me. Apparently, my grandfather had too. In his own quiet, conditional way. I didn't touch the money for weeks. I let it sit in escrow. Like a question waiting to be answered. What do you do with a gift you never thought you'd receive? Do you protect it? Invest it? Honor it? Or do you transform it? I chose the last one. We opened the application for something new. The Clarendon Fellowship. A program for returning adult learners. Women over 35. Some of whom had walked away from education, careers, safety. The ones who had fallen through the cracks. I knew them. Because for a while, I had been them. The announcement went viral within days. We had space for 12. We got 2,800 applications. The interviews were conducted virtually at first. Then we flew in the finalists. One woman had been a teacher, then a refugee. Another had lost everything in a divorce and rebuilt a bakery from a trailer. One was a former violinist who hadn't touched a bow in 18 years. They were extraordinary. And on the day they arrived at Windermere, I met them at the gates myself. I walked them up the gravel path, through the navy blue doors, into the foyer. I gave them the tour. And then I said, "You are not guests here. You are not lucky to be here. This is your home for now. And this house only shines when you stand inside it." They cried. Not because of the words, because someone believed them. The house grew louder in the best way. The younger students began to eat with the fellows. New projects emerged from those conversations. Intergenerational mentorship blossomed. Windermere was now not just a hub. It was a bridge. One night in May, I walked into the study and found Alexandra sitting at the desk. She looked up and smiled. "I didn't know you were back," I said. "I came to help with the documentary planning," she said. "Sasha said you wanted to archive Windermere's transformation. I thought I might contribute, if you let me." I nodded slowly. "Tell the truth," I said. "Only the truth," she promised. I turned to leave, then paused. "Alex?" She looked up. "Did you know about the policy?" She blinked. "What policy?" "Grandpa's. The dividend. He left it to me." Her face went still. "No," she whispered. "He never told me. I thought he forgot you too." I smiled faintly. "He didn't." That summer, Windermere reached its 5th year under my care. We held an anniversary celebration. Not a gala, a gathering. Everyone returned. Sasha. The first cohort. Bernard. Even Alexandra. There were speeches, music, a bonfire. We sat in the garden maze, under lanterns hung between hedges. And I looked around. At what I had built. At what we had become. A family. Not by blood, but by bond. And I knew something then. Windermere Hill had once been a fortress, then a war zone. Now it was a garden. And I had become the gardener. I hadn't expected to feel nervous that morning. But as I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master suite, once my father's room, now a sanctuary of pale linen, dark wood, and glass, I caught my own eyes, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Not because she was unfamiliar, but because she looked complete. I wasn't used to that. The morning sun warmed the edges of the windows. Outside, Windmere Hill was buzzing again, staff setting up tents on the back lawn, student volunteers folding brochures, a pair of delivery vans unloading long, narrow boxes filled with archival equipment. Today wasn't just an event. It was a landmark. We were unveiling the Windmere Archive. A digital and physical preservation of every step, letter, plan, and milestone, from the house's reclamation to its reinvention. It would live in the old East Wing, the same wing once reserved for cigar lounges and mahogany-clad dens of exclusion. We were turning the past inside out. We were making memory transparent. And every photo, every interview, every painful page was going to be available. Even the ones that painted my family in a light they might resent. Especially those. Sasha was the first to arrive. "Everything is stunning," she said, walking into the solarium with a tray of fresh fruit from her hotel, "but you need to brace yourself." I looked up from the guest list. "What now?" She handed me her phone. It was a video, a news segment. The headline read, "Fairchild Family Reacts to Windmere Archive. It's a Betrayal." My father's voice came through the speakers. "There are things best left private. I don't believe our daughter has earned the right to publicly frame the Fairchild legacy around her own pain." Sasha muted the volume. "He agreed to that interview yesterday," she said, "the day after you sent him the advance link to the archive." I swallowed. "It doesn't change anything," I said. But the truth was, it hurt. Even now. Even after everything. Because part of me still wanted him to see me. Not the myth, not the rebel, not the rogue heir. Just me. The daughter who stayed. Alexandra arrived shortly after. She wore a crisp blazer and carried a small camera crew with her. "Documentary team," she said. "We're just getting some B-roll of the setup." I nodded. She studied my face. "You saw the interview." I didn't reply. "He's scared," she said. "Scared people lash out, especially when the world changes without their permission." "It's not fear," I said softly. "It's grief. For a version of our family that never existed." Alexandra looked away. "You still want him to approve of you?" she asked. I laughed once, dry. "No, I want him to understand. That's worse." The event began at noon. Guests poured in. Alumni, students, professors, journalists, architects, and at least one sitting senator. They walked through the East Wing in hushed reverence. They stared at blown-up letters behind glass, listened to audio interviews from the early Restoration days, touched the touchscreens that held hundreds of indexed documents. They stood in silence in the letter drawer exhibit. 12 letters, printed in full, framed with the original handwriting next to the transcription. Grand's. My father's. Alexandra's journal excerpts. Even mine. It was all there. Raw. Unfiltered. True. At 3:00, I gave a speech. I stood at the podium under a tent on the back lawn, the entire rear facade of Windmere gleaming behind me. "This house once taught me what it meant to be invisible," I said. "Now it teaches others to be seen." I looked out at the faces. Some tear-streaked. Some smiling. Some caught between both. We do not preserve the past to sanctify it. We preserve it to understand it. To tell the truth, not because it flatters us, but because it frees us. Applause. Loud. Sustained. And then I stepped down. Right into the arms of the moment. The rest of the afternoon blurred. Smiles. Photos. Thank yous whispered by strangers who saw themselves in the girl I once was. By sundown, the lawn had cleared. The archival wing was locked. The lights dimmed, and I stood alone in the gallery, facing a new portrait, this one painted just weeks before. It showed the house from behind. The back terrace lit up at night, doors open, shadows of people laughing inside. And me, standing at the edge of the lawn, facing forward, as if walking away. That night I sat with Alexandra in the solarium. We shared a bottle of red wine. You know, she said, you could leave now, and this place would still carry you. You don't need to stay forever. I looked into the dark. The snow was gone. The stars were sharp. The trees stood tall and still. Maybe I don't, I said. So, what now? She asked. And for once, I didn't have the answer. But I had a feeling that the next part wouldn't be about reclaiming. It would be about releasing. There's a strange quiet that settles over a place when its purpose has been fulfilled. Not an ending, more like an exhale. In the weeks after the archive unveiling, Windermere Hill entered a season I'd never known it to have, a season of rest. It was as if the walls themselves were finally breathing easy. And so was I. The fellows continued their programs. The students, now increasingly international, came and went with structure and rhythm. The lecture halls were full. The gardens were buzzing with early summer bees. But I no longer felt like I had to be in every room. I had built something that could stand without my constant presence. And that realization, more than anything else, filled me with an ache I hadn't expected. Because if Windermere no longer needed me, who was I beyond it? One evening in late June, I walked the property lines. No destination, just a familiar ritual. The golden hour light stretched the shadows across the lawn and bathed the house in amber. From the far west field, where old stables had once stood, I could see the full facade of the estate. All of it. Every stone, every chimney, every window I had once looked through, wondering what a future here might feel like. It felt done. Not finished, but done. I turned back slowly and found Alexandra leaning on the post at the edge of the overgrown fence. That was your farewell walk, wasn't it? She asked. I smiled. Not yet, I said, but close. The next morning, I sat with Sasha over black coffee and fresh figs. She watched me carefully. You want to go, don't you? I nodded. It's time, I said, not to abandon it, but to let it be what it's supposed to be next. She leaned back. You already have an idea, don't you? I grinned. 3, actually. By July, I had quietly made the transition. Windermere Hill was to be governed by a founding board. 6 women. All alumni of the initiative. Sasha remained as director of development. Bernard, now retired, passed his security oversight to 2 women he had trained personally. Alexandra, after much hesitation, agreed to serve as head of the Archive Council. And me? I became chair emerita. No daily duties. No title that bound me to permanence. But my fingerprints would remain. On the stones. On the halls. On the people. I moved into a flat in Florence that August. It overlooked a quiet square and was bathed in morning light. The furniture was simple. The bookshelves sparse. It was everything Windermere was not. And I loved it. I painted. I wrote. I took walks and didn't explain where I was going. I disappeared into myself in the most healing way. And one morning, I received a letter. From a name I hadn't seen in years. Dear Genevieve, I visited Windermere last month. I was in town and walked the grounds like I used to when I was younger. It was unrecognizable. Not in its form, but in its feeling. The house used to echo, now it sings. I'm proud of you. Sincerely, Dad. I read it twice, then folded it, and placed it in the back pocket of my journal. Not to file away, not to store with the others, but to carry. That fall, I received an invitation from the Ministry of Culture in Brussels. They were organizing a summit on historical preservation through equitable restoration. They asked me to keynote. The words felt strange even as I read them. Keynote speaker, Genevieve Fairchild, Windermere Hill Initiative founder. I accepted. And I knew what I would say. Not about blueprints. Not about contracts. About reclamation. And how it's not about taking back what was stolen, but building what should have been given in the first place. The speech made headlines. Again. And my inbox flooded. Opportunities, offers, collaborations. But only one caught my attention. A message from a woman in Portugal. She owned a crumbling manor on the edge of a coastal cliff. She'd heard my story. She wanted help. To turn it into something more. Something like Windmere. But with her own story. I read it 4 times and replied, yes. It became the first in a new series. A consultancy. Silent legacy. Not my name. Not my face. But my vision. To help others do what I had done. Reclaim. Restore. Reimagine. And release. Back in Florence, I painted less. Not because I lost the urge, but because I had found a new canvas. People. Places. Potential. Windmere had been the beginning. But it was never meant to be the whole story. And now, as I watched the Italian sun slip behind terracotta roofs, I felt it again. The hush before the next becoming. Portugal smelled like the sea. Not the bottled kind, not the faint breeze you catch off a city marina, but the real thing. Wild, briny, ancient. As if the Atlantic had secrets, and the coastline had spent centuries learning how to keep them. I arrived in late spring. The manor was called Casa de Loba, House of the Wolf. It sat at the edge of a cliff, just beyond the village of Carvão, with waves crashing against the black rock below. It looked nothing like Windmere, but when I stood in its shadow, something about the bones felt the same. Forgotten, dismissed, waiting to be reimagined. The woman who brought me here was named Isadora Marques, 42, widowed. A mother of 2 grown sons. She had inherited Casa de Loba from her grandmother and tried for years to keep it upright with minimal resources and too much red tape. But her vision wasn't to restore it for herself. I want it to belong to the women here, she said, her voice as sharp as the salt wind. The ones who stayed. The ones who were told they were only useful in the kitchen, or the field, or the church pew. I nodded. I knew those women. I had once been one of them. The first week was all exploration. Casa de Loba was 2 stories of stone and weather-worn tile. No insulation, no working electricity. But everywhere you turned, there were carved wolves, hand-painted symbols on the ceilings, traces of ironwork buried in the dust. A diary lay forgotten in the attic. Written in 1918 by Isadora's great-great-aunt, Philomena. They think we howl to the moon, one entry read. Let them. It is better than them knowing we howl to each other. I read every page by candlelight and felt it in my chest. Casa de Loba wasn't just architecture. It was a map. A myth made of truth. We assembled a local team. 2 women architects from Porto. A historian from Lisbon. A group of teen apprentices from the nearby technical school. It was slow going, permits, language barriers, skepticism. But the bones of the place responded to touch. Walls were reinforced. Beams reset. The earth began to open itself to us. One afternoon, I was standing on the half-repaired balcony when a woman approached from the road. She was maybe 70, hair braided down her back, hands strong. "You are the American?" she asked in Portuguese. I nodded. She handed me a box. Inside, a bundle of letters. "These were mine," she said. "I wrote them here, when I was a girl." I opened the first one. Asterisk. I was told I should not dream of cities, so I dream of rooms instead. Rooms with windows facing every direction. That way I will always see a way out. I looked up. She was crying. "Make a place for them," she said. "For all our letters, all our rooms." I promised I would. By midsummer, the shell of Casa de Loba had transformed. We built the Wolf Room, an open space with arched ceilings and windows in every direction. We lined it with letters. Hundreds. From women all over the region. Unsent. Unspoken, unseen. Until now. Each letter framed in glass, backlit gently. Each with a small plaque, name, date, age. And one word, Genplantuandusi held. Back in Florence, I began drafting something I hadn't touched in years. My own book. Not a memoir. A guide. How to reclaim a house that tried to forget you. Part blueprint, part meditation, part archive. Each chapter a step. Each step a story. I sent early chapters to Sasha. She called me, crying. "This isn't just for women like us," she said. "It's for anyone who ever had to rebuild from under someone else's name." I kept writing. One night, I received a call from Bernard. He was older now, retired fully, living in the Lake District with his partner and 3 goats. "I visited Windermere last week," he said. "Didn't go inside, just stood at the gate." "And?" "It felt alive," he said. We were quiet. Then he asked, "You ever going back?" I looked out at the Atlantic, waves crashing like blood in the veins of the earth. "Maybe," I said, "but not to stay." The day Casa de Loba reopened, the whole village came. Children ran through the Wolf Room. Elders wept before their own words. The house, once hollow, now rang with footsteps, voices, music. It was not polished. It was not perfect. But it was full. Of story. Of strength. Of women who had howled to each other for generations. Now they didn't have to. Now they could speak. That night, Isadora and I stood at the edge of the cliff. The moon huge above us. "You did this," she said. "No," I said. "You did. I just reminded you it was possible." She reached into her pocket, handed me a folded page. A letter. Written by Philomena. Asterisk. "The house is not what we build. It is what we allow to live inside it." I folded it gently and held it close. Back in Florence, I painted again. A series. 12 canvases. Each a door. Some ajar. Some wide open. Some with hands pushing them. All with light spilling through. I named it Colleasy Entryways. Colleasy. I sent a photo of one painting to Alexandra. She texted back. "Noam C. Samir just added a new program, International Restoration Fellowship. Your name's all over the proposal." I laughed, then paused. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to go back. Not for permanence, but for a visit. To see how it had grown. To see who had stepped through the gates. Windermere Hill appeared on the horizon like a ghost I once dared to confront. And, somehow, like a lighthouse that had never stopped burning for me. After nearly a year away, my return wasn't dramatic. There were no parades, no announcements, no posts. Just a private car from the airport, my single bag in the trunk, and the winding road I knew by heart through the hills of Devon, each turn breathing a little more life into memories I thought I'd filed away. When the car pulled up to the gate, it paused. The driver leaned out. "There's a woman coming down the path," he said. I leaned forward. Alexandra. She wore a dark wool coat and boots that splashed lightly through the morning dew. Her hair was swept up. The scarf around her neck was one I recognized. Mine, once, borrowed and not returned. I smiled. Some things never change. She opened the door before the driver could. "So," she said with a grin, "are you ready to see what your house has become without you?" I stepped out slowly, shielding my eyes from the pale sun. "Lead the way." The transformation was immediate. Not cosmetic, that had long since been done. But the energy. The heartbeat. Windermere felt alive. Not dependent on me, but proudly independent of me. The navy doors had been repainted in a deeper shade, almost midnight. The brass lion knockers were polished to a golden shine. The front lawn was flanked by 2 new flagstones, each etched with names: alumni, donors, partners, a living tribute. Inside, it was warm. Not museum warm, not curated, not staged. It felt lived in, dynamic. Voices floated through the corridors, the soft tap of shoes on the marbled hall. Laughter, somewhere down the west wing. I stood in the foyer and turned slowly. Everything familiar, everything changed. Lav. The new director was named April Sumner. 38, former policy analyst, Windmere alum from Cohort 2. She met me in the library. "We have 3 new initiatives launching," she said, gesturing to the model on the oak table. Windmere North in Montreal, Windmere Med in Tunisia, and a mobile fellowship model we're piloting in Southeast Asia. My eyebrows rose. "You're going global faster than I did." She grinned. "Because you already laid the runway." I liked her immediately. Alexandra gave me the tour. The Wolf Room had been replicated, in spirit, inside the old solarium, now a story garden. Thousands of printed stories from women across the world hung from clips on suspended lines, rustling in the breeze like wind chimes. One was mine. Not labeled. Not spotlighted. Just part of the whole. I ran my fingers across the edge of the page and felt tears rise. Not of sadness. Of release. In the West Wing, the archive had expanded. Digital kiosks. Soundproof booths for oral histories. A virtual reality walkthrough of Windmere, circa 1901. And a theater. For the documentary. It premiered that evening. Under a white tent on the back lawn. Alumni, donors, current fellows, locals, even distant family members arrived. The lawn was strung with golden lights. Long tables held local food, fresh breads, honeyed meats, glazed root vegetables. Wine flowed. And then the lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. I didn't speak. Not in the film. Not on the stage. This was Alexandra's story to tell now. She had directed the documentary with a quiet power I hadn't known she had. The film didn't open with the will. It opened with me at age 10, reading in the garden maze. A recreation, yes, but painfully accurate. From the hair ribbon to the way I sat, curled over the pages of a battered book. It followed Windmere from silence to sound, from hoarding to healing, from inheritance to intention. At one point, an interviewer asked me, in archival footage, what I would have said to my mother if I could go back. I looked at the screen. I didn't remember this part. And then I said, I would have said, "You don't have to love me the way you were loved, but you don't get to erase me because I chose differently." Silence. Then the screen faded. The lights came back. No applause. Just a breath. Collective, deep. And then a standing ovation. Later that night, I sat alone in the gallery. Everyone had gone. Even Alexandra. I sat beneath the newest portrait. Not of me, but of Windmere. Painted from the inside looking out. As if the house, at last, was the one telling the story. I closed my eyes and breathed. The next morning, I packed my bag. Alexandra found me on the front steps. "You're leaving?" she asked. "You don't need me," I said. She smirked. "We never did, but that never stopped you before." I laughed. We hugged. Longer than before. Real. I walked to the gate. Turned back. Windmere stood, glowing in the morning light. Not as mine, not as theirs, as its own. And I thought, maybe this is legacy. Not what you keep, but what you can walk away from, knowing it will keep going. The road away from Windmere felt longer this time. Not because of miles, but because of what I was leaving behind. Not just a house. Not even a movement. But a version of myself that had come full circle. The girl who had once been forgotten now had an echo in every hallway, in every program, in every woman whose name was etched on the west wall beside mine. And I was ready to let that echo continue without me. I returned to Florence. The familiar clatter of bikes down the stone streets, the scent of espresso drifting from cafe doors, the echo of bells from across the Arno. My apartment, unchanged. Books left stacked by the window. Canvases untouched since Portugal. I moved quietly through the rooms, unpacking one item at a time, until I reached the last thing. A folded letter, creased and faded from the pocket of my coat. My father's. I reread it again. Still no apology. Just pride, cloaked in absence. It didn't hurt anymore, but I still felt it. The next few weeks passed in a calm rhythm. I painted. I took long walks. I hosted 2 former Windermere fellows who were traveling through Europe. We sat on the roof and watched the city blink to life at dusk. They asked questions I hadn't heard in years. How did you know you were ready to leave? What did it feel like the first time you knew Windermere had survived without you? I answered them as honestly as I could. It felt like both a victory and a grief. Because healing always has both. One afternoon I received a letter. This time, not handwritten. Not from family. From a publishing house. My manuscript had been accepted. How to Reclaim a House That Tried to Forget You would be published in 24 countries. Translated into 9 languages. They were calling it explosive and quietly radical. I read their praise with gratitude. But I knew what it truly was. It was a long letter to myself, one I never thought I'd write. The book launched in London. A small theater packed with readers and journalists and alumni from Windermere. Alexandra attended. So did Sasha. We sat backstage before the talk, sipping tea in mismatched mugs. "Do you realize what you've done?" Alexandra asked. "Written a very long letter to my younger self?" I said. She smiled. "You gave a blueprint to people who never thought they could draw." The questions that night came fast. What do you think makes a house a home? Did your mother ever see what you built? Would you change anything? I answered the last one slowly. No, I said, because everything I survived became a tool I used to build something lasting. Even the silence, especially the silence. Weeks passed. Then a month. I returned to Portugal. Casa de Loba had blossomed. Not just into a space for reflection, but into a full-fledged residency. Writers, architects, archivists, young women who had grown up on those cliffs, now teaching classes in the old sheep barn. Isadora met me at the gate. "It lives?" she said, smiling. I touched the stone. Warm. Breathing. I added a letter to the wolf room. Anonymous. But familiar. Asterisk. Sometimes what we build for others saves us too. Back in Florence, I began to gather notes. Not for another book, but for a different kind of project. An institute. Not a school. Not a retreat. A place to train caretakers of lost places. People who would one day walk into forgotten halls and ask, "What wants to live here again?" I called it the Clarendon Institute for Narrative Restoration. We bought a monastery in southern France. 17 rooms. 4 courtyards. 1 bell tower. The first cohort arrives next spring, and I won't lead it. I'll just welcome them. And then step aside. Because that's what legacy is. Not passing down power, but teaching how to wield it well. Alexandra sent me a photo from Windermere. The portrait room had expanded. Not with paintings. With silhouettes. Simple outlines. Framed. Each with a quote from someone who had stayed there, learned there, given birth to their future there. The room now held more than our family. It held the future. And it no longer bore my name. It was renamed the Room of Return. She included a caption, because we always come back to what changed us. I stood one morning on the rooftop of my apartment in Florence. Paint-streaked hands. Coffee cooling by the ledge. Birds flying low. And I thought of the house. The first house. The one that tried to erase me. And how I turned it into something that outlived the pain. Something louder than silence. Something braver than inheritance. Something that would never need my name to survive. And I whispered to the air, thank you. To the house. To the girl I was. To the woman I became. It rained the morning I received the letter from the Royal Archive. Not a heavy downpour, but a soft, persistent drizzle. The kind that makes stone buildings glisten and cobbled streets smell like old books. I had just finished my second cup of tea in the Florence apartment when the envelope slid under the door. Cream cardstock, embossed seal, British insignia. My heart jumped before my hands even moved. I opened it slowly. Nostime, dear Miss Fairchild. You have been selected for formal induction into the Royal Society of Architectural Preservationists for your transformational work in narrative restoration and historical equity. Your contributions have expanded the scope of what legacy means, and we are honored to recognize you at the upcoming autumn convocation. There was more, travel details, a ceremonial passage I didn't yet understand. But that wasn't what caught me. It was the final line. You are now officially a guardian of stories too often left untold. For the first time in a long time, I cried. Not because I needed this, but because the girl who was once handed photo albums while her sister got the mansion never imagined anyone would hand her anything ever again. The induction took place in Edinburgh. Inside an old university hall lined with plaques and stone-carved names. I arrived wearing a navy suit. Not because I wanted to echo Windermere, but because I wanted to walk in with its ghost wrapped around me like a shield. April was there, Alexandra, Sasha, a handful of Windermere alumni now running initiatives of their own. As I walked up the aisle, I locked eyes with each of them and thought, you are the real honor. The ceremony was brief. A few words. A medal. A handshake. But as I stepped off the stage, a young woman caught me by the arm. I read your book, she whispered. Then I reclaimed my grandfather's bakery and turned it into a grief center. I just wanted to say, thank you, for making space where there was none. I held her hand, and felt more seen than I ever had on a stage. That night, I sat in a hotel room with a view of the castle. Letters from the past stacked beside me. Windermere. Casa da Loba. The Institute. The bakery. The women. The walls we'd restored. And I knew I wasn't done. Not yet. A week later, I returned to the monastery in France. The Clarendon Institute had welcomed its first cohort. 16 fellows. From Kenya, Chile, Greece, Sweden. Each with a mission. Each with a place that needed to be seen, remembered, reimagined. I spent a day with them. No lectures. Just walks. I asked each the same question. What story is hiding in your walls? They answered with fire. One spoke of an abandoned library built by orphaned children during the war. Another of a mud temple in Nigeria, where women once wrote in clay before they were forbidden to read. A woman from Belfast described a burned music hall where no song had been played since her mother's final concert. They didn't want fame. They wanted to remember. And to make the remembering matter. Later, one of them approached me. A woman named Lena. She carried a parcel. I read about the letter drawer, she said. At Windermere. I made my own, but it felt wrong not to send this one to you. I opened the parcel. Inside, a single letter, handwritten on rice paper. In Arabic. Below it, a translation. Asterisk. You reminded me that home is not a place you are given. It is a place you dare to claim. Thank you for teaching me how to build a door when all I was ever shown were walls. Florence felt softer after that. I began to paint again. This time, maps. Not geographic ones, but emotional ones. A house with arrows flowing out of it. A door drawn open with hundreds of footsteps leaving. A tree where each root held a woman's name. I sent one to Windmere. Alexandra texted, "We hung it above the foyer. Everyone touches it before entering now." I received another invitation. This time from a museum in Mexico City. They were launching an exhibition on the architecture of resistance. They asked for an installation. I designed a room with no roof. Just mirrors on every wall. Each visitor would walk in and see themselves multiplied. Surrounded. Seen. Then they would write a note to their former home. Not always a physical home. Sometimes just a memory. Or a person. Or a lie they'd believed too long. The installation was called *I'm Still Here. Sasha visited Florence again. She brought wine. And news. "They want to adapt your book into a limited series," she said. I blinked. "Television?" She nodded. "Streaming. International audience. Creative control. All the right things." I poured her another glass. "Will it help more women find their houses?" I asked. "It might," she said, "or at least help them know they aren't crazy for wanting more than survival." I smiled. "Then let's do it." Months passed. Letters arrived. From homes I had never seen. A school on stilts in Thailand, returned to life after 20 years. A brothel in Eastern Europe transformed into a wellness collective. A synagogue turned underground library during the war, now restored as both. Each one its own Windmere. Each with a woman at the center. Standing at a threshold. Opening the door. And I realized something. Windmere wasn't the beginning or the end. It was a cipher. A key. A house that held every house inside it. And I was simply the first one who said yes to listening. The first time I stood inside Windmere, I was 7 years old. The last time, I was 43. And somehow, the house had outgrown both versions of me. That was the miracle. That was the point. I didn't plan my final return. It came as a whisper. A tug. Alexandra had written. "We're dedicating a new wing. You don't have to come, but I think you'll want to see it. No fanfare. No request for speeches. Just a doorway opening one more time." So I went. Spring in Devon is a different kind of awakening. Gentle. The kind that doesn't demand your attention but earns it slowly. The hills were green. The air held a promise of growth. When I stepped out of the car, I noticed it instantly. A new wing. Curved. Seamless. Built not to match Windmere, but to echo it. Stone pulled from the same quarry. Windows shaped like the original music hall. But the difference was the doors. Wide. Glass. No barriers. No locks. Alexandra met me at the threshold. She said nothing at first. Just held my hand. Then guided me forward. Inside, a room unfolded. Open plan, light pouring in. Walls lined with letters, yes. But also photos. Paintings. Sculptures. Each submitted by women who had reclaimed something. Not just places. Identities. Dignities. Lives. At the center, a spiral staircase led up to a gallery called Second Chances. And below it, a table. A massive table. Long enough for 50. Carved with one sentence. Everyone eats here. I walked slowly. Touching wood, stone, glass. Reading names. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. One plaque stopped me. A photograph of a woman in her 60s, hammer in hand. Caption, Marguerite A. Fairchild. Rebuilt her father's old barn into a shelter for displaced girls. My throat caught. My aunt. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She had been the only one who once whispered, "I see you." I stood there longer than I meant to, and whispered it back. Later that day, I joined a circle. Not a formal event. Just 10 women in the courtyard, drinking tea. Each had a story. A bakery turned refuge. A burned schoolhouse restored. A family graveyard saved from destruction. They asked me questions. Not about the will. Not about my parents. About courage. About grief. About silence. And I told them this. Grief doesn't always arrive in black. Sometimes it arrives in renovation budgets and zoning meetings and broken tiles, but if you let it live alongside you, not dominate, not disappear, it becomes part of the architecture of who you are. One of the younger women, Amélie from France, spoke up. What do we do when the world says our story doesn't matter? I answered with a truth that took me years to learn. Tell it anyway. Tell it so well they feel it in their teeth. That evening, Alexandra walked me to the garden. She handed me a small envelope. Inside, a deed. Not to Windmere. To a small cottage on the edge of the estate. It's yours, she said. No strings, no obligations. Just home, if you ever want it. I ran my fingers over the embossed edge. The address read, The Gardener's House. She smiled. Fitting, don't you think? I stayed the night. Not in the cottage, not in the manor, in the story room, sleeping on a pile of pillows under a wall of letters, as if the voices of every woman who'd been brave enough to write their pain were tucking me in. And when I woke, it was to the sound of birds, and a voice, familiar. You always did find the strangest places to sleep. I sat up. My sister. She stood at the threshold. Older. Not fragile, but softer. Her eyes held something I hadn't seen in them since we were children. Regret. We didn't hug. Not at first. We sat on the floor, among the stories. She held my hand. I was wrong, she said. I said nothing. She tried again. I didn't know how to love you except in comparison to how they loved me. That landed. Hard. True. She looked at me. Will you teach me how to do it differently? I nodded. Not out of obligation, but because maybe, finally, she had come home too. My sister stayed for 3 days. No fanfare, no forced nostalgia. We made tea in the gardener's house. We walked the orchard. We sat on the mossy bench beneath the copper beech tree and let the wind do most of the talking. At one point, she turned to me and said, I didn't think they were wrong when they wrote you out. I just didn't think I had the strength to say they were. I nodded. That was enough. She was enough. When she left, she pressed a note into my hand. Just 4 words. Keep the door open. Nammulamere. That summer, Windmere became something no one could have predicted. A sanctuary not just for the ambitious or the visionary, but for the broken-hearted. People who had lost things you couldn't see on a ledger. Inheritance was no longer the currency. Resilience was. A woman from Sri Lanka arrived after losing her family home to a fire. She designed a mobile memory museum. A trans woman from Ireland came with nothing but a suitcase and a manuscript. She left with a publishing contract and a sense of self. A refugee from Ukraine built a model for architectural healing in cities shattered by war. The house didn't fix them. It witnessed them. It gave them back to themselves. I spent more time at the gardener's house, growing herbs, sketching, walking the property at dawn with tea and a notebook, and occasionally writing letters I would never send. To my mother. To my younger self. To women I would never meet. Each began the same way. I see you. Each ended the same way. You are allowed to want more. The TV series was green-lit. 8 episodes. Filmed on location. But not at Windermere. At a reconstructed version. Because Windermere was no longer a set. It was a sanctuary. And it had earned its privacy. The premiere aired on a Sunday. We gathered at the Institute in France. Students, fellows, staff. We projected it onto the courtyard wall. As the opening credits rolled, I looked around. Faces lit by moonlight and story. And I whispered to myself, they will carry this farther than I ever could. The series sparked letters. Thousands. Viewers writing in. Telling us about the places that raised them, hurt them, healed them. A castle in Hungary. A sugar mill in Louisiana. A hut in Kerala. Each story different. Each story the same. Some wrote to ask, how do I begin? My answer. You begin with the room you're afraid to enter. Nude Ghent. The day Windermere was named a historical sanctuary by the UN, I received one final envelope. No stamp. Just placed on my desk in Florence. Inside. A single photograph. My mother. Young. Standing at the edge of Windermere's rose garden. Back when she was just 21. Back before everything hardened. She was smiling. Free. Hopeful. No note. Just the image. But it was enough. I had it framed. Not for my wall. For Windermere's archive. Not because she earned it, but because I needed to remember. Even the ones who hurt us were once soft. Once trying. And sometimes remembering that is the final healing. One last project. One final wing. Funded anonymously. Built beside the orchard. A listening room. No devices. No recordings. Just quiet. And a guide. Sit, breathe, let the house speak to you. It became the most visited space on the estate. Because, sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is stop. And listen. I turned 50. Alexandra threw a small gathering. Cake, candles, a letter from every woman who'd ever stayed at Windermere, stitched into a book. Inside the front cover. Asterisk, you didn't just rebuild a house. You rebuilt our ability to believe in ourselves. Happy birthday, Genevieve, I cried. Openly. Fully. Because they saw me. And this time, I let them. At twilight, I walked the perimeter of the property. Past the gate. Past the cottage. Past the new wing. Back to the original door. Where it all started. I placed my palm against the wood, closed my eyes, and whispered, thank you. Not because it had been easy, not because it had been fair, but because it had been real. And I had made it mine. Finally. Fully. Irrevocably. Somewhere in the house, a wind chime stirred. Not from weather. From the pulse of something alive. And I knew. Windermere would keep going. Even after me. Especially after me. Because I had let go. Because I had trusted others to carry it forward. Because I had believed in more than inheritance. I had believed in transformation. And transformation is the only thing that survives. As I turned away from the house for the final time, I smiled. Because I wasn't walking away. I was walking toward whatever would come next. Toward whatever house was still waiting for its story to be told. And I knew I would find it. Or it would find me. Because once you learn to listen, once you dare to stay, once you reclaim your voice, you never lose it again. Not even when the will says you don't exist. Not even when the world tries to silence you. Not even when the house forgets your name. You speak. You stay. You build. And eventually, if you're lucky, you leave the door open for someone else. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.